Oh.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. I'm Chris Larson. We've got Captain Rob Westcott and Chris Leagard from the New York DEC with us today. We're going to be talking some Lake Ontario salmon, kind of a little bit of a state of the lake, kind of what's going on out there. Chris, can you tell us real quick about kind of your role with the New York DEC and what you do there?
Sure. So I work for New York State DEC within the Bureau of Fisheries. Official job title is our Lake Ontario Unit Leader. And in that role, I manage the Lake Ontario Fishery Research Unit up in Cape Vincent, New York, and coordinate Lake Ontario fishery management with our DEC regional offices, and then also represent New York on the Great Lakes Fishery Commission's Lake Ontario Committee, where we coordinate fishery management between New York and the province of Ontario.
Now, Rob, you've worked with Chris before. You know him. You know what he does. Tell us kind of about your role. And I guess Captain Rob's a charter captain. He does some great work out on Lake Ontario, but you're also partnering with the DEC in a lot of different roles and things that you're doing with them. Can you just tell us a little bit about your work with what these guys are up to?
So I guess I could say Chris is a friend. We're literally on a text basis at this point, but we deal with each other with pen rearing projects. I'm also part of the Lake Ontario Fishery Advisory Panel. If you're unaware of that, that's just a makeup of stakeholders throughout the lake on both the tributary side and the lake side, along with the DEC, of course, and we just address concerns and talk about the issues that drive, Lake Ontario.
So one of the things you're doing today, Chris, is you're going to do kind of a state of the lake here. Can you just give us an overview of kind of where you guys see the lake and specifically, I guess, salmon and trout in that lake and what you've been working towards and what you still have ahead of you?
Yeah, I think as a whole, as an overview, fishing in Lake Ontario has been awesome. We have a diverse fishery. Chinook salmon's our primary game out in the lake, but there's also brown trout, steelhead, lake trout, Atlantic salmon. Fishing's been really good for all the species in recent years, so we're really happy about that. We have ice in the lake right now. We had a period of years around 2016 to 2020 or so where we had some concerns about the prey population, but that's rebounded, and so things are really looking good. One thing I'd like to piggyback on what Rob said about the Lake Ontario Fishery Advisory Panel, though. He didn't quite give it as its due, I think.
Probably not. Right. There's a lot more to it.
I think it's one of the most important things that we have going in the lake right now. It's this opportunity where we have 17 people on the panel. We sort of manage the lake in 4 different areas. We've got 2 lake and 2 tributary anglers from each of those, and 1 at-large member. And this is a group where we can talk and have more detailed conversations, share information with, but we can bounce ideas off of, and we've developed a relationship with these guys over the years, so we can say, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. What's the angling public going to think about this? And they can say, no, that's not something that you should be doing. And we say, all right, maybe we'll think about something else. Or they can say, yes, that sounds like a great idea. And then we say, all right, we think we're going to have public interest in this. Let's go forward with this initiative.
And probably the biggest part of that is the fact of the DEC coming to the stakeholders and saying, hey guys, here's 3 scenarios. Which one, a vote in the room, which one do you think is a better scenario? So the input thing, the DEC looking for input from us. We're always willing to give input. But it's always kind of been the joke that they've never wanted the input, but it's nice to have that, you know what I mean? Like, that connection's important. Not so much that it's transparency, but that openness and willing to work. It's a very different day and age than it was back in the day. Things were managed differently. I think the relationship between the anglers, whether you're a trib guy or a lake guy, and the DEC was very different than the past, 10, 15 years. And we're all open to it. So,
yeah.
So one of the things that we talked a lot yesterday with the salmon guys that we had here, is the alewife population. You brought it up a little while ago that the bait was in a really good spot. one of the things that I saw when I was here last May is there were alewives like all over the place. Like you couldn't drive into a harbor without seeing them, and it did seem to have an effect on the fishing. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that looked like and what you guys as an agency kind of see that, how you see that? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? You know, where are you guys at? Where those alewives were last year?
Yeah. I'm going to wait till that goes by.
We have over 170 vendors and 200 seminars available to help you learn.
It's a lot of talking.
All right.
Literature will come in for times and places.
At least we're not waiting on someone's license plate out in the parking lot.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Chris.
All right. So for alewife, alewife are primary prey fish in Lake Ontario. For pelagic prey fish that live up in the water column, they're like 98% of the fish out there. Almost all of them. We do have smelt and cisco and some other fish out there, but it's mostly alewife. We assess those fish every year. It's a cooperative survey between the U.S. Geological Survey, New York State DEC, and Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. Do that in April, late March and into April, as soon as we can get on the water. The reason for that is we assess those fish with bottom trawls, and alewife are at the northern end of their range, and in the winter, the warmest water in the lake's at the bottom of the lake. So the fish are concentrated down on the bottom. So we get out there as soon as we can in the springtime. We can assess them effectively with bottom trawls before they move up into the water column. And we've been doing that every year since the late 70s. Used to be just done in New York waters. We added, Ontario came on board in 2016. Learned that our half of the lake survey was not always representative of what was going on in the whole lake. It was one of the best things that we've done was making that survey lake-wide. But so like I said earlier, we saw a downturn in the population around 2016 or so. We had a couple years in a row where we had really low reproduction of alewife. We've had now since then several years in a row with good reproduction of alewife, and things have built back up. The reason that I think you saw so many alewife out there this year when you're on the water is that the survey reports alewife numbers in two ways: age 2 and older fish, what we call adult alewife, and then age 1 fish. Since we sample them in April, we don't get age 0s. We don't see them until they're 1 year old. And there was one of the highest numbers of 1 year old fish that we've seen in the survey this past year in 2025. So when we see that,
Walk the aisles there, pay attention to several of our vendors offering door prizes, so make sure you take advantage of that.
when we see those big year classes of 1 year old alewife, that's when they're most abundant. We saw them all over the lake last year, and that's really what you were seeing when you said every harbor we went into saw a ton of alewife. So.
Right. Well, we did have a die-off of alewife last year. Mm-hmm. My understanding is it's just the stress of too many alewife. Alewife get very stressed out when they're overpopulated, and we saw kind of an abundance on the south shore of that end result.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate the way you described that. So these fish, like I said, they're at the northern end of their range. When the water starts to warm up in the springtime, they'll move inshore, and then if the wind shifts, you get that warm water gets blown out. They hit a big sharp temperature break with the cold water. That stresses the fish. When there's lots and lots of alewife out there, the fish are competing for resources. They're in a little poorer condition, and they're less able to handle that. They're in a higher stress situation. So when we see big numbers of alewife is when you see larger die-offs.
Too many mouths to feed. They come out of winter. They're a little, not to say that they're unhealthy, but they're a little bit out of shape. They got the lack of nutrients through winter. A lot of bait competing for the same thing, and a lot of mouths to feed, right?
Yeah, just a little more stressed, so that when they get hit with that, they don't take it as well.
Gotcha.
So it's going to be interesting. It's February now. We're going to be on the water month and a half assessing these fish. So it's going to be interesting to see how that die-off played out. For right now, not too concerned about it. I think everything's still going to be good. We're looking forward to seeing strong numbers again this year. So
agreed.
So one of the things that when we set this interview up, the gentleman who helped us do that is you need to talk to Chris about the DNA study and what they're doing in Lake Ontario with the salmon DNA study.
Sure.
Tell us about that. What's that all about? And I know Rob is working with you. I know we actually did a little video on it. You can check it out on our YouTube channel with Vince Pierleone. I think we did Legacy on Lake Ontario with Vince Pierleone last year, and he talked about it a little bit there. But can you give our viewers who are watching today kind of description of what you guys are doing with the DNA study?
Yeah. So we've known that there's a lot of wild Chinook salmon in the lake for a long time. We did a big study, I think it was 2008 to 2012, where we fin clipped all the fish in the lake, used in like an automated marking trailer to fin clip all those fish. And then if you caught a fish in the lake, we could look at it. If it had a fin clip, it was a hatchery. If it didn't have a fin clip, it was wild fish. During that study, we found something like the proportion of wild fish in the lake ranged from like 30 to 70%, depending on the year class of fish and the age of fish you were looking at. So we knew there was a lot of wild fish out there, and we're kind of trying to manage predator-prey balance. So when we're thinking about how many fish we're going to stock in the lake, we look at the prey base. We also have to take into account that there's a lot of wild fish out there too. So we wanted a technique that we could monitor this on an annual basis. And using the marking trailer is really labor intensive. To mark over 1 million Chinook salmon that we're stocking, we would have to have like a crew of 4 people working double shifts for 3 weeks to run all those fish through the trailer. So it's a big investment of staff time up front. So we were looking at other options, and one of the ones that we wanted to explore was called genetic parentage-based tagging. Partnered with Cornell University, they did a study to validate whether or not this technique would work. In Lake Ontario, they found that it did. We just started implementing it. So what this is, we take a tissue sample from every female Chinook salmon used in the egg collections at the hatchery, do this both in New York and Ontario. Then we sort of build a genetic library of those tissue samples, and when we get a fish out in the lake, we can essentially give it a maternity test and say, does it match one of the mothers in our library? And if it does, it's a hatchery fish, and if it doesn't, it's a wild fish. So we started putting that in place in we started collecting samples for it in like 2021 and 2022, but 2023 was the first year that we had like our full library built for all the age classes of fish that were in the lake. So we've got data back from 2023 and now 2024. Our 2025 field collection data is going to be coming soon, but it's confirmed what previous studies showed, high proportion of wild fish in the lake, some of the highest that we've ever seen, which isn't really surprising because the years 2023 and 2024, the adult fish there were stocked back in 2020, 2021. Those were some of the lowest stocking numbers that we ever had in Lake Ontario. And we've been increasing them again since then as our prey base has kind of built back up. So it's a really interesting thing to have, so we can learn about this proportion wild every year. And the labor is like 1 or 2 people at the hatchery for a week, taking a tissue sample off of all of the females coming in the hatchery. It also provides some opportunities to do like a citizen science program, and this is where Rob and Vince are involved. We worked with our Lake Ontario Fishery Advisory Panel and asked these guys if they could sort of gather up some volunteers from each of our lake areas. And then we have 4 lake areas. We wanted 6 volunteers from each one. Asked one of the members of our advisory panel to coordinate those volunteers. Gave them all a sampling kit, 30 samples. Not asking everybody to go out there and collect fish from everyone you get all year long. Just try and keep the amount of effort we're asking for down a little bit lower. But with those 30 samples from all those volunteers, we've got some volunteers from LHTSA and ELOSTA, the Lake Ontario Trout and Salmon Association and the Eastern Lake Ontario Salmon and Trout Association that are primarily recreation anglers that are participating in this as well. But it allows us to get, we're looking for a sample size of 250 fish per age class of age 1, 2, and 3 Chinooks. We give the volunteers some instructions that say like target fish of this size range for age 1, this size for age 2, and it's worked great. We've gotten...
And those, we made some tweaks to the sizes realizing like the age restriction thing and kind of changing the parameters a little bit. I noticed in the past year. The other thing I'll mention too is the idea is to collect samples prior to like July 15th.
Yep.
And the idea is if we have the lake in 4 separate breakdowns, a west central, an east central, and an east, we can actually take that area of the lake and go, hey, you know what, the east central, we saw, you know, a 70-30 split. The west central, we see a 50-50. But the idea was we didn't see the mass of hatchery fish, you know, on the east end of the lake. So we're not doing it at a late time of the year. So we wanted to make sure that the lake was very diverse and the fish were spread out and we were getting a good sample. So.
Yeah, and that goes back to the when I mentioned that we fin clipped the fish in a prior study. We also coded wire tagged those fish and gave unique tag codes to all the places they were stocked. And we found out that from springtime through July, those fish are mixed everywhere in the lake. If a fish was stocked you caught a fish in, you know, fishing off the Niagara bar, and it was a stocked fish, it was equally likely to come from any of the stocking sites on the lake during that time. And but then as you get into August, September, those fish start segregating out. They're moving back to the streams that they're going to return to. They're stock fish, they're moving back to their stocking locations. If they're wild fish, they're moving back. So that's why we did that July 15 cutoff like Rob was talking about.
Yeah, that would be the question that I would have for you too is, has this taught you, and if so, what is the information that's taught you about how the fish move, you know, within the lake, not just, hey, is this wild or is this a stock fish, but like, what has it taught you about movement of the salmon in the lake?
So the way that we're doing the genetic study right now, like that's not the primary question. It's really just trying to understand the amount of wild fish in there. But the coded wire tagging study that we did, and there's been some acoustic telemetry studies that have gone on, really informed the movement of the fish in the lake. And what we see is just kind of what I was saying. The fish are mixed in the lake. It's a mixed population. We see
we know as anglers, like we see it, especially if you fish the west end. Certainly that's why the Niagara area is such a draw in the springtime, because there's such a flux of fish that are here coming out of winter. And we certainly see it as we get, you know, late in July, certainly in August, we kind of see that transformation and the big shift of the fish to the east. So, I mean, certainly something that we've noticed forever too. You know?
Yeah, and that's definitely, that's been the pattern for a long time. You look at our creel survey results and things, it matches up. Fishing for Chinooks in the springtime is great in the west, and they're in some years almost non-existent on the eastern half of the lake. It's just the way that those, I don't know if it's the water coming out of the Niagara or if it's warmer, that's where the bait's at. Like they're just always concentrated over there that time of year. And then as you move into the summer and fall, they distribute out to the other parts of the lake more.
We're visiting with Chris Leagard from the New York DEC and Captain Rob Westcott here this morning at the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. If you have questions for these guys, go ahead and drop them into the comments. We got a couple questions in here lined up right now. One is Jim is asking what caused the smelt population to decline in Lake Ontario?
That's a good question, and I don't have a great answer for it. It definitely did decline. I'm trying to think back what year that was. It was quite a long time ago that smelt really went down. And it didn't happen just in Lake Ontario. It happened in Lake Michigan too. That's where I grew up, was out in Muskegon, Michigan. And when I was a kid, we were smelt dipping off the piers and stuff out there. And that's gone in Lake Michigan as well. Something in the lakes changed, and it used to be more of a mix between alewife and smelt, and now it's really heavily dominated by alewife and fewer smelt. If Brian Wydell from USGS was here, he could give you a better explanation about that. He's our prey fish scientist we work with the most in Lake Ontario, but I don't have a great answer for why that decline happened for smelt.
Another guy is asking, and I'm assuming he's asking about the alewife, but just says, what was the age of the die-off?
It was a mix of ages. We saw a lot of young fish in there. Like I said, there were a lot of age 1 fish in the lake this year, so we saw a lot of those in the die-off. But there were older fish mixed in there too, a range of sizes. One thing I should mention about the alewife die-off that we saw this year is DEC staff collected some of those fish and tested them for disease to make sure that there wasn't something going on there, and it was this sort of natural die-off. But and we tested them; there were no disease issues in those fish. So seems like it was just that natural thing. And when that happens, it does affect all the ages of the
A lot of
fish.
different stressors just kind
Yeah.
of coming down on them all at one time, and
Yeah, I know that for a month and a half, the ones I saw it was certainly a mixed age class. So fish of all sizes, anything from mature alewife down to little guys. So.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit, like we've talked about kind of what's happened with the bait fish, we've talked a little bit about what you're doing with DNA to study these fish and whether they're naturally reproducing or stock fish. What do you guys see in the New York DEC as the future of salmon fishing in Lake Ontario? What are you guys building towards right now? Do you have something where you're like, this is where we want to be?
Well, we're in a pretty good place right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how much better it can get than we have right now. We've seen, for Chinook salmon in particular, since 2017, the last, 8 years or so there, we've seen the highest catch rates for Chinook that we've seen in the lake in the history of our creel survey that goes back to the 1985. So we're pretty happy with where that is. Our brown trout fishing has been excellent. Steelhead fishing sort of took a turn down around 2014, 2015, and we've been building back up on that. Our tributary fishery for steelheads coming back up to where it was before there. Atlantic salmon are becoming a larger part of the fishery right now. So I think we want to keep things right where they're at.
Yeah, that was something that actually I was talking to somebody about yesterday. Is I've been making a trip out to Lake Ontario once a year now for 5 or 6 years, and last year when I was here, I fished for 3 days, and I saw 2 Atlantic salmon, and I've never seen one before that. So what's going on with the Atlantic salmon?
So that's a common experience that people have. So Atlantic salmon are native to Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is the only Great Lakes where Atlantic salmon are a native fish. From back in like the 80s, 90s, there was a push to try and restore Atlantic salmon fisheries that wasn't very successful. Since then, it was around 2003 until 2021, DEC stocked 50,000 Atlantic salmon. So really small number. In comparison, we stock 480,000 brown trout, 500,000 steelhead, 1.2 million Chinook salmon. So
In the Atlantics that you were stocking were of different age classes also? Were they all yearling fish?
the ones we were stocking were all yearling fish.
Okay.
There were some experimental stockings done by USGS of fall fingerling fish, which are a younger age class, and they don't tend to return as well. Province of Ontario stocked a lot of early life stage fish, fry and spring fingerling fish. Anyways, though, starting in 2021, Atlantic salmon had been this sort of unicorn fish, right? We stocked very few of them. Once in a while, somebody would catch one. But 2021, we put out a new Atlantic salmon fishery management plan. We increased the number of fish we were stocking to 200,000, focused all of our stocking on spring yearling fish. We had been stocking a lot of our Atlantic salmon, of the few we stocked, up high in the rivers. Like we were stocking Salmon River up by the hatchery, which is like 15 kilometers or 12 miles. Don't quote me on the distance. It's quite a ways upstream. It's been a while since I worked on the Salmon River. But we moved all those stockings down to the mouth of the stream. We wanted to approach it and say, we stock brown trout down at the mouth of the stream and it's directly in the lake and we could get a really good return. Let's do that with Atlantic salmon and see what happens. So we boosted the numbers, we changed our stocking strategy, and we've seen some really good returns on that. And this year was the best year we've seen out in the lake. I say this sort of jokingly, but it's entirely true. Like Atlantic salmon fishing in Lake Ontario right now is better than it's been since the early 1800s.
So I had a customer on board, it might have been last year or the year before, and he had fished Lake Ontario a very long time. And we netted in Atlantic, brought it in the boat, and he was like very surprised. Wow, I've never caught an Atlantic. Went through the whole spiel with him, and he's like, that's really awesome. I remember using the word unicorn. The next fish in the boat, Atlantic. 2 fish later, another Atlantic.
Yeah.
And he goes, I thought they were unicorns. And I was like, all right, hey, slow down. I got my best Atlantic salmon program out right now. So
Yep.
certainly we see an improvement in that fishery. So they're becoming a little bit more than a unicorn.
Yep. So it's going to be really exciting to see where that goes in the future.
So that kind of begs the question. We were talking about Chinook salmon, and that we're seeing, most of the Chinook salmon in the lake are naturally reproducing fish. Well, clearly your stocking has had a big impact on the Atlantic salmon population. Is that at this point a put and take style of species? Are you seeing natural reproduction from that species, or is it pretty much stocked fish?
It's pretty much stocked fish. We see the most wild production from Chinooks because those fish come in the fall, spawn, and the fish are out of there by like May, June. Steelhead, Atlantic salmon, coho salmon, brown trout, those fish all spend 1 or 2 years in the streams before they migrate out to the lake. A lot of our streams, Lake Ontario tributaries, get warm in the summertime. So Chinooks do really well in there. These other fish, not as well. But there's definitely, we did a clipping and tagging study for coho salmon, found a fair amount of wild production of coho. We have documented natural reproduction of Atlantic salmon in the Salmon River previously. So the plan we have out right now, we have like a short-term goal of we want to get fish into the fishery, and we're doing well at that. We have a long-term goal of increasing natural reproduction of Atlantic salmon. That's going to require habitat restoration in the streams before we get a lot of progress on that front.
So we're stocking a lot of Atlantics on west end of the lake. There's still an allotment for the Salmon River, but it seems there's been some attention that's put on the west end. Mm-hmm. 75,000? What is that number for 67,000? Am I close?
You're close.
Okay.
We do 50,000 fish per site, 4 sites. We do Oak Orchard Creek out on the west end. That's a site that we have stocked at least since 2003. We saw really good returns to that stream this year. We were getting reports of people catching Atlantic salmon almost every day in November in Oak Orchard Creek this year. Sandy Creek, which is just west of Rochester, Rob's home stream. Yeah. We're stocking 50,000 fish there. We've had a couple years of really good returns there. And then we stock the Salmon River, which is on the east end, and South Sandy Creek, which is a little ways north of the Salmon River.
All right, I'm going to go with this. So the big talk last year, and if you've walked this show, the amount of coho stuff, the amount of coho gear that's in this building right now tells you how good that coho fishery was. Give us your best explanation of why was that rock solid last year?
It was awesome, and it's really good. So Chinook fishing wasn't great in the springtime. The lake didn't set up right, or didn't set up in a way that fishing took off in the springtime like it normally does. And lots of people were fishing cohos, and those cohos filled in and really saved the day for a lot of trips. Coho salmon, we stock 135,000 cohos. We did this clipping and tagging study probably 5 years ago now. We made a change. We used to stock a mix of spring yearling coho and fall fingerling coho. We found the fall fingerlings weren't returning to the fishery well. We moved all of our stocking to spring yearlings. We stock those fish now at Salmon River and at 18 Mile Creek in Olcott out on the west end, and at Oak Orchard Creek on the west end. And we've seen some good returns off of that, but we found that there was a fair amount of natural reproduction of coho too, and when we see these sort of big coho years, we probably had good wild production that led into it.
Right, so those
year.
are just bumper crop years, like
Probably.
hey, natural reproduction, because I mean stocking numbers don't show those numbers, right?
Correct.
Like,
Yeah.
usually cohos they're there, and the West End really benefits from them early in the year, but those fish essentially disappear until they return home at the Salmon River, and then the guys down there catch them when they stage. But those fish kind of disappear throughout the summertime, but it's a numbers-based game. So
Yep.
when you see it like last year, it's eye-opening, right?
Yeah, and it's usually, I won't say it's only on the West End, but primarily on the west area we see those coho in the spring. They were, a lot more of the lake had coho fishing in the spring this year as well. Like, I don't know if you fished out of Rochester at all this spring, but they were catching them as far over there as well too.
So I would say this past year would be the first time that we actually put a coho spread out and specifically fished for coho out of my home port, which is Bald Eagle. And that was the first time that we've ever fished that water, that Monroe County, Orleans County line with that. And they've always kind of been a bycatch, like, hey, we might catch one or two, or hey, there's some cohos out or around, let's put out some other coho stuff. But last year would probably be the first time that we said, let's sell out to cohos and coho fish, because the king fishing was kind of on the, it needed to go on the up and up, and it wasn't. So we turned to cohos, and we were surprised at how successful we were in our waters. So
Yep,
I know that everybody enjoyed it.
Yes,
So.
Us too. And what interesting about coho, virtually all the fish in the fishery are 2-year-old fish. So we stock them as a 1-year-old, or if they're wild fish, they migrate out of the lake as a 1-year-old. And then you catch them the next year, and then they run the rivers as a 2-year-old fish. Very few coho stay in the lake till age 3. So we see this sort of boom bust cycle where you get a bumper crop like Rob was saying, or you get really good survival on your stocked fish, or both, and you have this great year, and then next year might not be that way.
There was maybe 3 years ago we had a nice bumper crop, and the same thing. We all really enjoyed it, but obviously nothing like last year. But I will say the other thing that everybody noticed was the size of those fish in springtime. Like, they seem very healthy, very big for certainly that time of year. Is that just a bait thing? They got enough access to bait? Okay.
Hard saying.
There's lots of theories. Like, I live in this world of charter captain theories. I hear it all the time from many different directions. So
yeah, and the thing with everything in biology is complicated, and it's almost never one thing. You got it. Yeah, having good numbers of bait helps. We had that big year class of young alewife out there. Coho get onto those a lot. They're a smaller fish than Chinooks are. That plays into it, but you got to have the right growing conditions in the lake too. Water temperatures and how everything sets up drives that as well. So
Yeah, I definitely saw it last year too. My annual pilgrimage to Wilson. Last year it was big coho bags, and in the past it was, I would say, skewed mostly towards king, and then last year it was heavily skewed towards cohos, and that's what was there, so that's what we were catching. But it was definitely something that you could see while you were there. I mean, it was pretty apparent.
yeah, and that's like one of the strengths of the fishery that we have is there are all these different fish out there. In the open lake, most of the anglers want to fish Chinooks. That's the most targeted fish out there. But when Chinook fishing is great, that's awesome. If it is off, for a period of time or for a season, there's other fish out there. In the east, brown trout fishing, really big. In the springtime, they fish browns big time, but those guys will shift to those when the coho bites off or when the Chinook bites off. West End, summertime, if the Chinook bites off, you can run offshore and you can fish steelhead. You got lake trout available to you also.
So I had Chris came out, and we filmed out of Bald Eagle this year, and my focus, primarily I'm king. We had a tough spring with that, and he saw that. We quickly switched gears, and we went to the lake trout program. I think we even gave brown trout a fair shake, but we just had too clear of water. And so we went from a king, say, mixed bag program to brown trout fishing, and then quickly changed over and went, all right, let's go lake trout fishing. But that adaption is nice, or that availability to switch gears and be able to do that is really nice.
So we are getting a couple questions about some of those other species, and we want to get to those in a second. But since we're talking coho, we got a coho question here just came through. Just want to know what percentage of coho plants do you feel like survive on a year-to-year basis?
Given a direct number is tough because we don't do like a census where we get out there and collect every fish in the lake and count how many there are, but a good amount. We get really strong returns on our spring yearling coho. I'm not gonna, if Mike Connerton, who's a research scientist in my office, was here, he might be able to throw a specific number at you and say it's X percent. If I did that, I'd most likely be wrong and say the thing. So I'm gonna say we get really good returns on our stockfish. I don't know what the exact number and how many survive. I'll tell you with Chinook salmon, there's some published research on it though, where when we had the coated wire tagging studies, we looked at our pen rearing program and our direct stocking. We didn't really talk about the pens all that much, but that's another huge sort of volunteer and angler involvement program where we deliver the Chinook salmon that are stocked in the lake to volunteers that raise them in pens at the stocking site for 3 weeks before they get released. Since 2020, every Chinook that we've stocked in the lake has either been pen reared or it's one of our hatchery brood stock that we grow in the hatchery to a larger size. But those fish, I think it was like 14% survival on our pen reared Chinook salmon. Was like I mentioned, Mike Connerton, he published a paper on that quite a while ago. And Dr. Mike Connerton. And then he finished his PhD in like 2021, I think, but he wrote his PhD thesis on the coated wire tagging study with Chinook salmon that we did, and looking at natural reproduction, looking at relative returns from the pen program and the direct stocking, looking at straying to different stocking sites. So,
yeah, that pen rearing makes a humongous difference, and I think it's just a great thing. I think it's the other thing I think that I see it does is it creates community, and the people that are doing that are super passionate about it, and they love to share it. I see it on social media every spring. The guys working on those pen projects, and I think it's an awesome thing for the fishery, and I think it's an awesome thing for the people that are working with it as well.
Well, I think as fishermen, if you're a Lake Ontario fisherman, whether you're on the trib side or the lake side of things, we love the fishery. So any kind of involvement, it's kind of like just us volunteering. Anything we can do to help, we're willing to do it. So, and this was certainly a project. What is it? 99 was the first. Late 90s was the
1998 in Oak Orchard Creek was the
first year. So it's been going on a long time, and it's funny because it's a lot of the same guys that were there, to start things. Oak Orchard specifically, Captain Bob Songen was there. So, but our involvement in that, that's a big deal to most of the people that do it. So we feel passionate about it. And we're glad to do it. So.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about the program. I think it's one of the most successful programs in fisheries management in the Great Lakes.
So I got a tough question, and it's been brought up multiple times since I've been at the show.
You knew it was coming.
Yeah, here we go.
We got to throw one to them. Yeah. Hey, we're good. A lot of guys are wondering and talking about Chinook size. Rob, why are we not seeing those fish? Why are we not seeing those fish? Where are the 30-pound fish?
Well, that's not too tough. They're still out there, just not in the numbers that they have been in the past. We do see some 30-pound fish every year, but so it's complicated. But Dan Bishop, who works for DEC, he works in our Region 7 office in Cortland. He's the natural resource supervisor down there, but he used to work in fisheries. He did a really big involved regression model to try and tease out what are the factors that influence Chinook salmon size. And the thing that influenced it the most was Chinook salmon catch rate. And that is when there's a lot of Chinook salmon out there, the fish aren't as big. And when there's fewer Chinook salmon out there, the fish tend to be large. And in the last, since 2017, we've seen the highest Chinook salmon catch rates that we've seen in the history of the program. So we've got a strong prey base out there right now. We also have a lot of Chinook salmon out there. And so we're not seeing quite as many of those big fish as we used to see. We measure the size of Chinook salmon in our creel survey. We have like an indicator that we use for assessing predator-prey balance and making decisions about how many fish we're going to stock. That is the average size of an age 3 Chinook salmon in August in the lake when they're theoretically at their like peak size. And we saw that in 2019 was about tied with the lowest that we've seen. The lowest value we've ever seen was back in 2007. But 2019 was tied with that. And this is, we made stocking reductions in 2017, 2019, and 2020 based on declining prey fish abundance and declining size of Chinook. We've since made 4 stocking increases because we've seen prey fish numbers come up, but we've seen the size of the fish come up as well. In last year, 2025, fish were bigger than they were in 2024. Average age 3 fish was just over 20 pounds, which is still pretty good. But there's not as many of those 30 pounders as we've seen in some years, but they're still out there.
Is it safe to assume that those 30 pounders, for the majority of them, are 4-year-olds anyways? Do we have a lack of 4-year-olds in the system?
So
where at a time maybe there was more 4-year-olds in that fish that are hitting 4 years old?
Not really. So there's really never been very many 4-year-old fish.
I know that they've always been kind of a blurb on the screen. Like there's enough to mark it on the chart, but
yeah, it's like I think the most we've ever seen in the harvest is something like 9 or 10% of the fish were 4s. Back in the 80s. We see 4-year-old fish every year. A lot of times, the largest fish that we see are 3-year-olds.
Okay.
Not always. I think it was, a couple years ago, I think it was Joe Oakes caught a 35-pounder.
In springtime or something crazy, right?
Yeah, and so a lot of times when people catch these big fish or they catch fish that they're interested in, they'll take a scale sample off of it and mail it to us. They did that, they mailed it in. Mike Connerton aged the fish, that was a 4-year-old. So sometimes those big fish are 4-year-olds, but a lot of times they're 3-year-olds also.
I guess in long term too, something that the parental-based tagging can show us is when we do catch these fish, we know that, hey, that was a wild fish, or hey, that was a hatchery fish, and we can tell what hatchery it came from, correct?
Correct.
So we'll know what hatchery it came from. We're not to the point that we know what water it came from wild-wise, but that's certainly something but you'd be able to tell us like, oh no, those fish are actually with everything that's in the system currently.
Yep, and that's like, we haven't quite gotten into that stuff yet with the parentage-based tagging program. We're still just getting off the ground with it, but we definitely have. It allows us to ask a bunch of interesting questions about our hatchery fish at least.
Well, we got this question a little while ago, and I was kind of saving it because we were into the salmon stuff, but it's a brown trout question. And I think every time we talk brown trout, this word keeps coming up, no matter who we have on the show. And you're going to know the word when I say it, but Skamania. They want to know what happened to the Skamania and why we're not putting those in the lake anymore.
Yeah, so Skamania are steelhead, but these were a summer-running strain of steelhead. We used to stock a small number of those in the Salmon River. I think our stocking target for Skamania was something around 50,000 fish, so it was always a relatively small chunk of the fish that we stocked. We used to fin clip all the Skamania strained fish. And what we saw over time is that all those clipped fish were coming into the hatchery about the same time as all the Washington strain unclipped fish. So we were putting a lot of effort into keeping those fish separate, fin clipping those fish, monitoring those fish, and they were coming back just like the other steelhead were. So that was the main reason for doing away with the Skamania program. Now I talk to anglers all the time.
What's the fascination with them?
Especially tributary anglers, right? Then on the Salmon River, there's interest in Skamania still. They would, I think, when I say those fish were all showing up at the hatchery at the same time as the Washington strain fish, when I say that, I mean most of them were. There were some summer-run Skamania that people would catch now and then, and it was an interesting thing to have out there. But as my supervisor says, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze on keeping that program in for the amount of fish we were getting back in the summertime.
Very good. Rob, do you have anything else for Chris?
So we do, one of the new things, one of the new strains of fish that we have is brown trout. I believe that officially this year, or maybe it was last year, now those fish are totally in the system, and 100% of our stocking allotment is the new brown trout strain.
That's
You want
correct.
to touch on those a little bit?
Sure. So we've traditionally in New York State used what we call the Rome strain brown trout. These are produced at our fish hatchery in Rome, New York, the Rome hatchery. And these fish were unique because they were bred to have resistance to furunculosis, which is a disease that fish get in the hatchery and brown trout in particular. However, these fish have been in the system for a long time, and they needed to have a refresh. They were becoming too domesticated. So we wanted to preserve that disease resistance. So we crossed wild male brown trout from Oriskany Creek with our Rome strain domestic female brown trout to create this. It's not really a new strain, we just sort of injected some wild genetics back into the strain that we have in hopes that they would have a little bit of a more survival instinct to them. Some of the fish in the hatchery were a little conditioned and would sort of sit there and wait for someone to throw feed at them on the surface, right? These ones that we've introduced some wild genetics to, talk to the guys in the hatchery, they're a lot more skittish, they behave differently. So we're hoping that we're gonna get better survival on our stocked fish with this. We sort of use the term new strain because it's the vocabulary we have, but it's really the same strain, we just injected some wild genetics into it. But those fish started going in the water last year, so most of the brown trout we see in the fishery are 2-year-old fish. We stock them as 1-year-olds, so we'll see what spring fishing is like this year, and that should all be from the new Romiskany strain brown trout. So.
I think you kind of hit it there, but I just see if you can clarify it for us. When you say they became too domesticated, what does that mean?
So the fish have been a domestic brood stock where they have spent their lives in the hatchery the whole time, and then I don't work in the hatchery, so if I might not get this entirely correct, but then those fish get crossed within the hatchery to develop the future brood lines. There hadn't been wild genetics introduced to that in decades. So these fish in the hatchery, when you would walk by the raceways, the fish
would follow you.
The fish would swim up to the surface because they're conditioned to sort of live in the hatchery, and we wanted them to be conditioned to living in lakes and streams more. So that's my administrator who doesn't work in a hatchery description of it.
As an angler, so brown trout are pretty much equally stocked numbers throughout the South Shore, and they're directly stocked into the lake. And what we've seen as lake fishermen is the stocking truck would show up, stock into the lake. You could return back the next day, and the brown trout are still in the same spot. Like, okay, go do things. And obviously the concern there is cormorants, other predators. If the fish aren't, splitting up and doing fish things, it makes them easy prey. So.
You mentioned cormorants. That's like, I'm surprised we haven't gotten a question about that. That's like the most common question that we get, and especially with brown trout, but also with Chinook and steelhead and Atlantic salmon. There's a concern about predation on those fish after we stock them. So we've been doing, it's either 3 or 4 years that we've been doing it now. We contracted with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we have cormorant hazing crews that are out at some of our stocking sites where cormorants are known to be an issue. Those guys will come out there and they'll haze birds, clear them out of the area a couple hours before the stocking, stay there till dark, come back there the next morning, keep birds off them. So we think that's been a really successful program in trying to reduce predation on those newly stocked fish, especially browns, but we do it with all our Penreid Chinooks as well. So.
Well, Chris, we're wrapping up here. Is there anything else you want to get out to people before we call it a day?
I think we covered just about all of it. Fishing in Lake Ontario is awesome, and everybody should get out there and give it a try.
Rob, last words?
I got none, so I think we touched on a lot. We probably ran over our time slot, but all good. So. But no, thanks for Chris for joining me, and our sound guy over here, Chris. Thanks for having me. And
Yeah.
on to the next.
Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate both you guys spending some time with us today and our audience. And it was a really, really interesting talk. I just enjoy talking to guys like you that can kind of bring some science to it and tell us about what's going on there. And then you got Rob, who's out there trying to catch them and working with you guys too. So he's kind of got both perspectives. And I think this is just a really good time to sit here and talk with you guys. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Thanks to everybody. Let's go Earl Purcell. Earl, you win the package. Go to Facebook, drop us a DM, and we'll get that out for you. We'll see you here, guys, in just a little bit. We'll be back on the air this afternoon.